Hello, I'm Dr. Karen Janes, psychologist and energy healer in the UK. Welcome to the Life Made Easier podcast, where you will find ancient wisdom with a modern approach. In each episode, we are going to be sharing useful information from the world of energy healing to develop and enhance your energy intelligence and to make your life easier in simple and practical ways.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Tiffany Hunter. I'm an energy healer in the United States. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the differences and the similarities between spiritual healing and energy healing. Those are probably words that you've used and heard, and you may have assumed that they're the same. I think both Karen and I came to this podcast because we're aware that they're often used interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. They have a different approach and they have different techniques associated with them. So for people who are trying to navigate this world, either professionally by going into it as a professional healer or as a client trying to seek solutions, it's a good idea to understand the differences between them. And before we get into the details, I just want to take a moment to define some of the terms. Spirit, when we talk about spiritual healing, for us, we're defining spirit as the part of ourselves that endures. So to a Christian, this would be the part of them that goes to heaven. Yeah. For a Buddhist, it's the part that reincarnates. To a spiritualist, it's the part that's able to be communicated with after death by a medium or a spiritual healer. So that's what we mean by spirit. Now, if we're talking about an energy healer, that doesn't necessarily mean that the healer themselves doesn't have a spiritual life or that they won't talk about spiritual things. And it certainly doesn't mean that they won't be working on or working with the spirit of the person. It's really much more about how they approach the work and the techniques that they're using.
Yeah, I know. I think I don't know about you, Tiffany, but I think a lot of people are surprised that not all healing is spiritual or might be considered spiritual. Sometimes when people ask me what I do and I start to explain, they see, oh, you mean like spiritual healing, or sometimes called faith healing, which I
Mm-hmm.
would use interchangeably with spiritual healing. So it's more about how, as you say, how the work is done. Um, and I mean, definitely some overlap in why you might go to one or the other, and what you might hope to get from it. But definitely some differences, which hopefully we will tease out a bit more.
Yeah,
So
I think both spiritual healers and energy healers are seeing the same kinds of conditions and have the
yeah,
same kind of goals of the person that's walking in the door. Um, as
yeah,
you say,
and
there's a different approach.
yeah, and obviously, depending on you and your beliefs and your background and what's important to you, may affect or sort of impact which type of healing feels most comfortable for you. And you should absolutely go with, whichever you feel most drawn to. And that might also be one thing at one time and one thing at another time.
Hmm.
Um, so to talk a little bit more about what actually is spiritual healing before we come to the what is energy healing, which is really our area of expertise. A spiritual healer generally, now, there absolutely may be some exceptions to this, would work with some kind of spiritual entity that they would probably describe as guiding them, maybe working through them, one that they're able to communicate with in some way and get the wisdom of either, information that might even come as kind of knowledge or words in their mind, but also potentially kind of an energy that might then come through from that being, that entity. And examples of these sort of entities, because I think we're trying to give you a sense of this is a broad area. So there are still
Yes, broad
differences
strokes. Broad
between,
strokes.
not all spiritual, just like not all energy healers are the same, not all spiritual healers are the same. So some examples people often might talk about their spirit guides. They work sometimes with a spirit guide, sometimes with a number of spirit guides, sometimes with whoever past, person who's passed on comes through to them on that day. So some people have a guide they work with, others it might be more general. Some people might say that they were working with the energy of God or a god, a deity. And some particularly indigenous cultures might talk about working with ancestors. So how the different words people use, how they might describe it, will vary. But the that key component of spiritual healing is generally that there is some kind of connection or communion or communication with an entity outside of the person themselves, who is the one you're meeting with, if you like. Um, so
Angels. That's another one.
yes,
I've heard
yes,
spiritual healers will talk about
yes.
angels, that they're working with the angels.
Yeah. And where it's a considered to be, someone who's passed on, that again would be, someone who was in some way still accessible for their advice or their knowledge, and that they, someone in that realm, however you might understand that to be, or however you might describe that, would have access to knowledge or experience that those of us still on the physical plane, if you like, wouldn't have. So that just hopefully gives you a bit of a sense of how, again, allowing for variation and individual differences, how someone who does what they describe as spiritual healing might be talking or thinking about what they do. And spiritual healing is usually practiced or commonly practiced in spiritualist churches, or sometimes even in a conventional Christian church with the power of Christ. Again, in indigenous communities, through their connections with, that might even be the spirits of the or the ancestors of the place, of the land. So how that's conceptualized does vary quite a lot. I mean, you will also find spiritual healers, working from a clinic or working from a room in their home, or in the same way you might find energy healers doing that. But I think energy healers you tend not to find working in a place of faith or religion or spiritual
Hmm.
practice, where you might find a spiritual healer there.
Yeah, you know what you make me realize? You know what you make me realize is and I don't know if this is true for you, but I've been hearing more frequently healers talk about working with aliens, or they'll talk about downloading information from aliens, which is not an energy healing approach, because we'll define that later in a minute, but it's not really spiritual either,
Hmm.
right? It's not connected to a spiritual practice or a faith. So I'm not really sure what box we put that in, but I think it's worth mentioning. Have you come across that in the UK? It's something
A
I see more
little.
increasingly here.
Yeah, I think less so in the UK, but it raises an interesting point, because some of the things we mentioned in that list, like a deity or Christ or angels, might be something that you would kind of pray to.
Hmm.
Whereas the spirit of your passed on loved one, or just somebody who works as makes themselves available as a spirit guide, you wouldn't necessarily pray to them, but obviously you have a belief that they exist outside of the physical realm
Right.
that we're.
That they have access to information and skill sets that are not available to the practitioner, which would be the same as aliens. I've never seen anybody praying to the aliens, but there's obviously this belief system that the
Yeah.
aliens are communicating something from outside the system that the practitioner doesn't have access to.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I mean, there's also, I suppose, some of us might think about plugging into, something called the collective consciousness, collective
Hmm.
unconscious, which, a well-known psychotherapist, Jung, talked about. He kind of coined that term, and that somehow there's this like place of energy that all of our thoughts and ideas and kind of are held, and that we can sort of access that information, and that people's creativity kind of can come from there. Almost, like an example would be, you have an idea for a book and you don't get around to writing it, so it kind of goes up there, and then someone else can pluck it out and write that
Right.
book.
Yeah.
um yeah, we're kind of wavering off the point a little here, but
As we're prone to do.
yeah, it's kind of an interesting point. Yeah, where that kind of line is in a belief or a faith or a,
Hmm.
what do we
Hmm.
call spiritual, that may be something that
Right.
will change over time.
Well, all of those things, all of the types of healing that we've talked about, all whatever name we want to call them, spiritual or out, I don't think the aliens come under that. But in contrast to energy healing, which is not about being a channel or being a vessel for something from some consciousness outside the system that has more information than the practitioner, coming through that channel, coming through that practitioner to do the work or assist the work. Energy healing is more about using is more focused on the energy anatomy, specifically of the person on the table, and using the frequencies of the natural frequencies and energy in the world around us and channeling that. So, as Karen mentioned earlier, we know a lot more about this because this is more of the kinds of healers that we are.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean that we don't have a spiritual practice. I think anybody listening to this podcast, obviously we have a spiritual belief system and we have a practice, but the techniques that we're using with clients on the table as energy healers doesn't include that external consciousness. I thought what you said about Jung was really interesting because I feel when we talk about connecting to the natural frequencies in the world around us and channeling them to work into the body, the collective consciousness of Jung, I think, well, how, maybe that's where the two types of healing intersect, right? Because
maybe.
I do think intuition and information does come from that.
Although it's an interesting thing because you remind me of an experience that I have when I'm working with people, not infrequently, and I think some people who are maybe more in the realm of talking therapies might also have a similar experience, although might explain it differently. But I have experiences sometimes where I'm working with somebody and it's almost like a question pops into my head, and it isn't necessarily a question that I would, if I'd just been thinking logically, that I might have asked. And but I usually listen to that and ask the question. And sometimes people might respond by like kind of, it's obvious that question has real meaning, has real value. And my sense of how that happens, like where the information that was an important question to ask comes from, is my kind of reading of the person's energy. So
do you mean like rather than coming from an outside, rather than their spirit guides telling you what to say, you're reading it from their energy? Yeah, that's me too. And I think that's consistent with energy healing versus spiritual healing. It's not a question or information that's coming from that person's spirit guide. You're reading it off their body and their consciousness, the energy of their consciousness.
Yeah, it's like there's something stored in their energy system in their body that, relates to that injury they had, or, it could be something like, maybe they've never talked about their siblings, or they have talked about their siblings but only sisters say, and you suddenly go, did you have a brother? Or, and they will say, oh yes, I never talked to my brother, or I had a brother who died, or or I don't know. There seems to be something I feel like is relevant about bicycles, or I don't know. Like some random kind of piece of information that doesn't actually relate to anything they've already told you about with their words, but it's like there's something held in their energy, but yeah, very much it's coming from my reading of them rather than some outside guide. Or
it's I mean, you and I were trained in the same lineage. We had the same teacher, so we work very similarly. And I think the example that you use is a beautiful one to illustrate what we're talking about, because I do think a spiritual healer would have a sense that question is coming from, like I say, the spirit guides or from God or something, where I'm sure you've had the same experience I've had, where clients will say, are you psychic? How did you know that? And it's a difficult question because it depends a lot on how you define psychic. Right?
Yeah.
Right? And so reading the energy in the person's body and learning, like seeing the injury. I love what you said, seeing the injury, feeling the energy in the body where that trauma is placed, in that person's body and being able to translate that into English in order to be able to help them. Does that make me psychic? Does that make you psychic? Again, it really depends on how you define the word. But really, what we feel we're doing as energy healers is have learned how to take that frequency and translate it into something usable for the person.
I'm now thinking we need to do another podcast on how do we define psychic.
How do we define psychic? Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's interesting because if you Google spiritual healing, you'll get some stuff which very much fits with what we're talking about. You might get some stuff about praying. You might get some stuff about shamanism, which is, another form of kind of spiritual healing. But you'll also get stuff that certainly would fall outside of what we would define as spiritual healing, like breath work or journaling or spending time in nature. And if you Google energy healing, you'll also get things that don't really fit, like meditation and yoga. And I mean, you might say that meditation and yoga could bring some benefit to your energy system, in which case they may be providing in some way some healing. Just like you might say doing physiotherapy might, strengthen, or doing going to the gym with a personal trainer might help healing from an injury because you're making some muscle stronger or something. But there's not actual healing happening directed from somebody else towards your body, kind of thing. So I think, one of the reasons we wanted to do this topic was because of this kind of confusion and misunderstanding, and to try and just have a conversation, I guess, about some of these things. And as often happens when we start to have conversations about these things, we end up with even more questions, or certainly other ideas for other podcasts.
I'm curious if it's because of our profession and our experience that when we Google something, we Google spiritual healing and we get things like breath work and journaling, that we bristle and we get frustrated. Or I would like to think most people, if they thought about it at all, would recognize that that's not a spiritual healing technique. That through the process of journaling, that may be part of a spiritual practice and connects you more closely to a higher self or higher power, but it's not a healing. It's not a spiritual healing technique.
Yeah.
It's incredibly messy. And I think the division of what's become energy and what's become not, and what's become spiritual and what becomes not, is it's messy. And I think it's important to tease out, because I think there are people who are very committed and strong in their faith, and they don't want to entangle that in their healthcare, any more than they want to go to the dentist and have to talk about their faith. They just want their teeth cleaned. They just want their cavity filled. And energy health and energy knowledge and understanding how to take care of your energy anatomy should not include having to agree with the person that you're working with. I shouldn't have to share the same beliefs as my gynecologist or my dentist about that, And I think we both feel strongly that people shouldn't be excluded from good energy healthcare because of this.
Yes.
But at the same time, there could be, there's people who will enhance that experience for them. So having a clear understanding of it and being able to know where one begins and the other ends is important.
Yeah. And I think both of us certainly have clients who we support with their spirituality, if you like.
Absolutely.
And equally, we have clients who are very clear that for them, spiritual practice is not a part of their life, and they just want some help for their energy health. Or it is a part of their life, but it's not something they want to come and work with us about. And all of that is okay. And, there may be some people for whom, there may be some people for whom having a similar belief system to some of the people they use for other services might be important. But it may depend really on what you're looking for, and whether you feel the healer you're coming to see whatever they call themselves, is going to be somebody who can help you with whatever problem you want help with, and how important the spiritual side of that, or the healer's belief systems or practices are, may vary. And again, it doesn't, it's different things will be important to different people at different times. But hopefully through listening to us talk a bit more about this, it will at least help you to understand, kind of untangle a little bit some of the differences, so that you know who you might want to seek out in order to
Mm-hmm.
help whatever it is you're looking for help with.
Yeah. I would love it if there's any spiritual healers that are listening to this. I'd love to hear what the process looks like. Because
Mm.
as an energy healer, one of the first things that we do is a diagnostic reading of what's happening in the energy. So we'll, as we talked about, using energy frequencies that are on the planet, natural frequencies, and running them through the body and seeing where they get stuck, where they're running too fast, where they're running too slow, and then start going through a series of looking at the energy anatomy and the systems and the organs and what needs to be optimized and what's stuck and what's clogged and what's being held that needs to be released. If I'm a channel for a spiritual entity, am I doing any of that? Is God doing that? Are the angels taking care of that? Do I need to have an understanding of how the chakra system works? You and I have a sophisticated understanding of what makes how a chakra needs to work and all the ways to get it to be back into balance when it's gone off balance. I'm curious if you're a spiritual healer, if that's information that's required.
It would be great. I think at some point we'd love to do some podcast episodes where we're interviewing people, and it'd be
Mm,
great to be able to have a conversation with somebody
yeah, just share
who's,
the information.
yeah, for sure. I wonder if it might
Yeah.
be helpful to, yeah, so if anybody's listening who would be, interested in coming and having a
Let's
chat
do
with us
it.
about it, yeah, that would be great. Amazing. We'd love to hear from you. I wonder if it
Can I
might
can I
be,
just request that when we do those formats, we're allowed to drink tea while we're recording because it's
sure. Um, So I wonder if it might be, so you talked, Tiffany just touched on there about the different vibrations of energy that are in the world that as energy healers we essentially make available to a person's body. Um, and some of the ones that people might be familiar with, or at least have heard of, are Reiki is one, and we have another episode where we talk about Reiki. Both of us work with Reiki and teach Reiki, which is something that most people, unusually in a way, is something that most people can learn to use. The other ones that are quite commonly known about, and again are ones that you could do some work with yourself, are Chi. So Tai Chi class, Qigong class, something like that. Some martial arts would be working with Chi and helping you, get the flow of Chi through your body better. So more in I suppose, a sort of self-care way, again, like not something that necessarily needs a practitioner doing something to you. Chi is also the primary energy that acupuncturists work with. And then prana is the other one, which is often described as a kind of life force energy, common in yoga practices and Ayurvedic practices. So that's the kind of Indian medicine system. And so, and breath work, often people talk about prana, sort of
Mhm.
again improving the flow of prana in your body. And sometimes Reiki, Chi, and Prana are used interchangeably. I think we would understand them as three different things, which,
Yes.
we're not going to go into that now, but they're just energies that you may have heard of. So part of our work as energy healers is bringing those energies in, making them available to your body, and developing skill in which one might be useful for you right now. But also using those energies and various other techniques to, as Tiffany said earlier, work with the energy anatomy. So helping, again, commonly heard of parts, which again, we also have other podcasts about if you want to know more about them, but our aura, our chakra system, those are parts of our energy anatomy that meridian lines. They're parts of our energy anatomy that you may be more familiar with, and we can use these energies and various techniques to help those parts of us be in better balance, much like I don't know, a chiropractor or an osteopath may be working with your bones and your muscles and your tendons and ligaments, and have an awareness of that to get your body adjusted so that it's working better, moving better. Yeah, so that's kind of just to give you a bit more information about what really is energy healing, and commonly I think is an area of caring for ourselves that is missing for lots of people. So we I know this is true of Tiffany as well. We see lots of clients who are kind of doing the right things. They eat generally a good diet, they're getting some movement, they're trying to get enough sleep, maybe they do a little bit of meditation or yoga, they're kind of addressing these different areas of health, and something still isn't quite balanced or working, or and often some energy care, if you like, energy medicine is a missing part of their the way they look after themselves and their well-being. And it's a really important part that we can neglect simply because we don't really know about it or the need to take care of it. We don't get taught to clean our aura and protect our aura in the way we get taught to brush our teeth or wash our face or take showers occasionally, or whatever.
That is very true. That is true. And I think we absolutely can agree everybody can benefit, needs to take care of their energy health. And that doesn't, it may or may not be important to people, whether or not they're seeing a spiritual healer, whether or not they're seeing an energy healer, but it also might be. And if it is, understanding it should be pretty obvious when you start talking to the person and asking them questions. We had a discussion about how to find an energy healer, how to choose one. And it will be pretty clear when you start talking to them. And if you're trying to do that, listen to that podcast, because it'll give you some good tips on how to evaluate an energy healer and somebody that you might want to see. But other than that, I don't know that it matters. I mean, I wouldn't say one is more effective than the other. And I think the experience of being on the table as the person is probably very similar. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's probably as similar or as different as going to see, I mean, you could go and see two different energy healers who might work in different ways, or two different spiritual healers who might work
Right. One
in,
might be using crystals, somebody might
yeah,
not be,
yeah, but
somebody may use
equally you could see
sound.
two
Yeah.
chiropractors and they may not work in exactly the same way. But I mean, there's definitely overlap anyway, I think, whoever you're seeing. One thing I would say, which I hadn't really thought about until now, my recollection of often spiritual healing that's practiced in spiritualist churches is frequently done seated rather than
Right
laying
at the
down.
table. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
100% sure if that's considered to be purely a practical thing. Like if you've come to a building like a church, having everybody lay down on a couch probably isn't the most practical, or
Well, I
whether,
was thinking because now they have to store all these massage tables.
yeah, but I don't know. Again, it would be I've never thought to ask somebody who does that kind of work whether in an ideal world would it be better that the person was laying down, or actually do you prefer to have them seated? Is
Hmm.
there something about being seated? For example, like meditation. I mean, you can do meditation laying down, but it's likely,
You'll
if your
fall
goal,
asleep. It's
yeah,
likely you'll fall asleep.
if your goal for meditation is to find that relaxed state, but with a focused attention, generally having your spine vertical and be sitting up is more conducive to that than laying down. So I don't know if there is a particular reason why it tends to be practiced that way beyond the practicalities of, as you say, keeping a load of couches in the back of your church, or
Yeah. I do a monthly Reiki social where people come together and practice Reiki. Students learn things and people come to receive. And We do it in in a local church,
Mm,
in my neighborhood, and they're generous enough to hold three massage tables for us. But
right.
it takes up a lot of space.
Yeah, and
Well,
equally, I've held Reiki shares, Reiki circles where we've particularly focused on how can we do a Reiki session seated, because
yeah, we always have a few
partly
chairs
because
for
of
that.
that practicality, you can fit more people in
Yeah.
the room and you don't have to have as many
Hmm.
couches. But also sometimes people who want to learn how to use Reiki don't necessarily have a couch at home, and it can be a great way to offer someone some healing in a situation that wouldn't be appropriate for them to lay down. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we do the same because that's when it's lovely to be at a Reiki social where you can practice on a couch, but
mm.
most people are working on people in a chair. Anyway, look at us, we're digressing again. Well, hopefully that gives folks an idea and understanding that energy healing and spiritual healing really aren't the same. That there's value in understanding the difference between the two, and it may or may not be important to you. What is important is taking care of your energy health, whatever your beliefs are. So find something that works for you, to give you the best outcome that you're most comfortable with.
Yeah, and we were thinking about we as we said, we'd really love to hear from any spiritual healers who would be interested in coming on the show and having a chat with us. But we'd also love to hear your questions. Have you had experience of either an energy healer or a spiritual healer, and does that fit with what we're talking about? Or maybe you've gone to both and you've had, felt they were very similar or very different. Did you have a preference? Did you feel they serve different purposes? So we'd love to, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to share about that, we would love to hear your experiences, and we could maybe do a follow-up episode to this one at some point.
Yeah, that would be great with tea.
I have a sense you haven't had enough tea today. We need more tea.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for
Take
joining
care.
us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Hi, I'm Carol Smith, the producer of the Life Made Easier podcast. We hope today's episode gave you some meaningful tools and takeaways to help make your life feel a little lighter. You've reached the end of this episode, but not the end of the ways that you can support us. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, follow us on social media, and check out our Patreon for extra content and ways you can go deeper with us. There's also a whole library of episodes waiting for you to help increase your energy intelligence. Take care, and we'll see you on the next Life Made Easier.